by a show of hands, how many people plan to get married in the future? If your hand isn't raised, that's okay, but my topic is relevant to those of you who raised your hands because those of you who are going to get married are going to relate to the topic, and those of you who aren't are going to be able to relate. Today I'm going to persuade you guys why cohabitation is harmful to marriages. I'm credible on this source because my freshman year of high school I did a research project on this topic, and also after much research coming up to this week, I'm ready to share with you guys what I've learned. The three main reasons cohabitation is harmful to marriages is, one, the divorce rate is higher if you cohabitate before marriage. The second reason is that stress levels are higher in a cohabitation relationship. And the third reason is because of the consumer lock-in theory. The first reason I'm going to talk to you guys today about is the divorce rate in marriages. First, I want to ask you, would you willfully move in with your partner if you knew that if you ended up marrying that person, that your chances of divorce would be higher? In the National Health Statistic Reports published in 2016, it talks about how family dynamics have changed drastically and how cohabitation rates have gone up drastically also in the past few decades. In an article in The Spruce in 2016 titled Cohabitation Facts and Statistics You Need to Know, it states that the divorce rate is 5 times higher for those who cohabitate before marriage, and also the reconciliation rate for those who could cohabitate are 1/3 that of a married couple. So basically that means that you're way less likely to get back together if you cohabitate than if you just move in when you get married. The second reason you should not cohabitate is because the stress levels. I want you guys to think of a married couple in your life. This could be your parents, your grandparents, your aunt and uncle, or your friend's parents. Usually, or sometimes, marriages look okay from the outside, but something that we all know is that marriage is one of the most stressful things you can join into. In an article in The Spruce mentioned earlier, it also states that cohabitation is more stressful than marriage, and that's a huge statistic because we all know how stressful marriage can be. Also, in an article titled You Should Think Twice Before Moving In with Your Partner in Psychology Today in 2015, it states that when couples went from dating to cohabitating, their relationship quality declined drastically, and also there were way more arguments than before. Another statistic is that in an article in the International Economic Review published in 2006, titled Cohabitation, Marriage, and Divorce in the Model of Matched Quality, it states that a study done to married couples showed that 80% of married couples and only 20% of cohabitated couples relationships were still intact. Now that I've shared with you guys the second point, I'd like to move on to my last and final point, which is the consumer lock-in theory. The article called The Downside of Cohabitating Before Marriage in 2012 from the New York Times states that the consumer lock-in theory is one of the largest reasons cohabitation doesn't work. The consumer lock-in theory is a behavioral economics term that generally means that some situations are easier to get into than out of. So for example, when you're thinking of how this could apply to you, if you're dating your partner and you guys both have separate apartments, you guys are both paying rent, but you guys hang out every minute you get other than work or school or something, it may sound like a good idea to just move in together and split the rent. But the problem with this is that when you do move in together, you're sharing rent, you're sharing furniture, you may get a dog, you have a lot of liabilities that are together. So if one day you look at your partner and think, I don't want to spend the rest of my life with you anymore, it's not just going to be as simple as a breakup. Not that breakups are simple. It's going to be who's going to pay for the couch, who's going to get the dog, just like that. So, in summary, today I've talked to you guys about the 3 reasons why you should not cohabitate with your partners in the future. The first one being higher divorce rates when you cohabitate. The second one being elevated stress levels in cohabitation. And the third being the consumer lock-in theory. Now, for those of you that raised your hands, I hope that you take with you my advice on hopefully sitting down with your partner and talking about these risks that come with cohabitation, and also take responsibility and be proactive and not go into a marriage cohabitating first because the divorce
Imagine a cold room with a stretcher in the middle. Now imagine a person walks in with scrubs, a mask on their face, and needles in their hands. And now, you see a glass separating you from the guards that is bringing your younger sibling in to this room. They can't hear you screaming that he or she does not deserve to die. Lethal injection is the most common method of execution in the United States, killing 1,200 people since 1976. As a citizen of, or you may not be thinking that this has anything to do with you, but as a citizen of the United States, you may be called to jury duty, and you need to know why a juvenile does not need to be imposed with the death penalty, in case you're ever in the courtroom and a case like this is resting in your hands. I've taken many criminal justice classes, have competed at a state level and with my classmates, and have done extensive research on the subject. There are many reasons as to why a juvenile should not receive this kind of punishment, but the two main are the lack of brain development and the immaturity that comes along with that. The first reason this law should not be imposed is because of the lack of brain development. Teens' minds are still developing when they're 16, 17, and still develop when they're into their early adulthood. A 2012 Gale article implies that the United States is the only country that does this kind of punishment, and they have yet to realize that it is wrong and prevents the teens from ever correcting their mistakes, and instead holds them and not giving them a second chance. During maturation, the brain undergoes large-scale structural changes. Fatty tissue, called myelin, wraps around neurons, and this is speeding up the signal transmission in the brain cells, mainly in the brain regions, usually in the frontal lobes, which develop, and the frontal lobes is what keeps us from having the maturity that we need to realize what's right and wrong. So in this picture, you see that the red and yellow means they're less mature, and that happens in the 5-year-old up to pretty much the preteen area, from probably about 5 to 13. And then in the teenagers and 20-year-olds is when it really starts to be more mature. But you can see that in the 20-year-old's brain, it has more maturity than in a teenager's brain. In a scholarly psychiatric services article, Lawrence Steinberg states, "It's one thing to say teens don't control their impulses, but it's another to show that they can't. The frontal lobes are key for making good decisions and controlling impulses. Aside from lack of brain development, immaturity is another reason why juveniles should not be imposed by the death penalty." Brendan Dassey was 16 when he confessed without legal aid. Dassey was 17 when he confessed to the murder of Teresa Halbach. He was 16 when he confessed to the detectives that he helped his uncle rape and kill this girl. His false confession is probably due to the fact that his brain was underdeveloped when he confessed, so he probably was only left to believe that he had to confess. In an ABC News article, Dr. David Fasher, a psychiatry professor at the University of Vermont, notes, "It doesn't mean adolescents can't make a rational decision or appreciate the difference between right and wrong, but it does mean that when they're confronted with stressful or emotional decisions, they're more likely to act impulsively on instinct. This proves that mental immaturity can cause them to act irrationally when they're overwhelmed." When compared to 16 or 17-year-olds, the teenagers are usually more impulsive, aggressive, likely to take risks, and are more vulnerable under peer pressure. My reasoning for this speech is to ask you to agree that the death penalty should not be imposed on juveniles. A person should not be put to death because their lack of brain development or their immaturity. Learning right from wrong comes differently to everyone, and no child should be robbed of their life because theirs caught up too late. One mistake should not take a juvenile's life. It's not too late to take sides. Any amount of research will prove to you that the immaturity and lack of brain development is not right. An adolescent should take different punishments like rehabilitation or a lesser punishment rather than spending their life behind bars and never really learning how to correct their mistakes. This can change and only will change if you look past the death that a juvenile may have caused and instead look at the circumstances surrounding the situation. A more in-depth research can conclude that immaturity and lack of brain development should not be looked at when trying to sentence someone to death. The juveniles and their families can benefit from this law being banished because it'll allow the juveniles to have a second chance and learn from their mistakes, as previously mentioned. And it'll also give the families a sign of relief. This law works really well in Kentucky since 1976, and if it can work there, it can work in Tennessee too. In summary, you learned about the two reasons why juveniles should not be imposed by the death penalty, which are lack of brain development and immaturity. I want you all to agree that the death penalty should not be imposed on juveniles because of these reasons. Now when you find yourself in jury duty, instead of just assuming and taking sides of the opposing argument, I hope that you realize that some things that the juvenile cannot control can play a big role in whether they should be sentenced to death or not. Thank you.